Clear the closing doors, please.
I'm Emily Lutzker.
And I'm Anna Kamasya.
Today, International Arrival speaks with Iranian-Canadian film, video, and performance artist Rah Eleh, whose work critiques the visual stereotypes and performative aspects that shape female gender, nationhood, and ethnic identity.
Welcome, Rah. So great that we got to take advantage of you being here in New York for your visiting professor position at Pratt this semester. How's that going?
It's going really well, actually. I'm having a great time, and because I'm teaching video, and it's such an iconic city for video. The history of video started here. This such a significant city. So when we're doing the lectures and we're talking about, Namjoon Pike taking the taxi cab and going to Greenwich Village and showing his first video work, it's right there. And then you have all of the distributors and the collections. I mean, I took them to Chelsea, to Dia, to see Steve McQueen, and it was just so epic, these huge installations. And just, the historical significance of the city, especially to video art. So it's just been so cool to be able to teach video here.
That's awesome.
Yeah,
awesome for you
exciting.
and awesome for them to have you here to also kind of bring that excitement to the class too. That's really fun.
And just because we're in an audio medium here, and our listeners probably haven't seen some of your work, like I haven't gotten to see it in person.
Right.
So thinking about something like Celestial Throne, you said it's a 2-channel video. On one video is this, I'll say, outrageous spectacle-driven game show, sort of in a kind of different plane than a regular game show is. And on the other screen, you see the game board itself. So can you describe it a little bit more about what happens and what the experience is?
Yeah, so Celestial Throne is Jeopardy. It's a recreated Jeopardy, and the game show exposes coded and hidden far-right internet vernacular. So the categories are like memes, hashtags, fashwave, which is fascism and wave aesthetics. And there's some humor. Poll, which is from 4chan, which is one category, whereas politically incorrect messages. So, and the game board has also a glossary of terms. So in installation, sometimes there's a QR code that'll lead you to the glossary, or I'll have the glossary as a printout. But I've also been interested in turning it into an augmented reality project.
And that
accompanies the video.
The glossary is actually accurate, so there's an educational element as well.
Super, yeah. It's definitely a pedagogical project. The video. So we have on one side the screen, which frames the clues, just like in Jeopardy. Even the screen, I borrowed the design from Jeopardy. And also the host is on that screen. On the other screen, you have the 3 contestants. Mm-hmm. So that's the 2 channels. I was inspired because I had this show at Articule in Montreal with the Supernova Project, which is also a talent show parody, drawing on like Britain's Got Talent or America's Got Talent. It's a talent show parody. And that one I had tried to do it as a 2-channel, tried to split the work as a 2-channel. And we similarly, recreated the framing, but it wasn't made for 2 channels. So there were these areas of kind of void that I had to fill in with GIFs, and I got to be a little bit more playful, but then I really wanted to do it proper, like film for 2-channel proper. So, we did that, and in the green screen, we in the script, and I had a script supervisor and everyone making sure my eyeline matched, and you know what I mean? So that we could do a proper 2-channel game show. And so that was the Celestial Throne project. And the characters, reoccurring characters that are in my work, the 3 main ones.
So Celestial Throne and Supernova has the same characters?
Yes.
Just briefly, can you tell us about the characters, who they are?
Yeah, so there's Oreo, who's my white supremacist character. Through that question, through that character, I look at, what does it mean to perform whiteness? What does a performance of white femininity look like? But it's more complicated. when we start bringing in conversations of like Iranian nationalist discourse and this mythology around the Aryan race myth, in Iranian nationalist discourse, and the struggle with self-identification or categorization in the Iranian diaspora. So, for example, in a family unit in diaspora, you could have your parents who identify as Aryan and white, which is like, for me, very troubling to want to identify with something that's so closely associated with Nazi Germany. But, there's still that discourse and it's still there. And, Iran is called the land of Aryans. And so there's this sense of indoctrination and supremacy. But when we're in diaspora, as I am a first generation refugee, but like my sister, we identify as racialized. So we identify as people of color. We're more likely to engage or affiliate ourselves with other people of color, like Arabs, or people who are maybe strange bedfellows for our Iranian Aryan parents. So there's this struggle in the family unit of self-categorization. So you have your one side that identifies as white and yet having very much racialized experiences, especially post 9/11. And then you have the younger generation who is kind of grappling with that, being like, well, no, my experiences are racialized, so I don't identify as white. So there's that struggle in the family. So through the character Oreo, this is something I've been working on. At first, the character, when I created her, it was right after undergrad. I was doing a residency in Paris. It was the Georgia Fee residency, and I created the character in response to the fact that the French government was trying to implement a legislation in Quebec to ban the hijab, and they had already done that in France. So my project was to go and create this character who unveiled and, performed whiteness and like found her liberation through unveiling. And it was like a critique of Orientalism. And again, always humor, always parody. It was like YouTube video style. So yeah, drawing on kind of net art, feminist net art. And then, it started with my master's. I actually had an experience at another residency that year. I met this Iranian curator who was based in New York, and I was living in Montreal at the time. And I was telling her I'm moving to Toronto because, I just can't deal with the xenophobia as a woman of color in Montreal. Like I can't deal with and I grew up in Quebec, So I was like, I just can't deal with it. I have to go somewhere that's more Anglophone. I have to go somewhere that's more multicultural. And she was appalled that I had identified as a woman of color in that, I'm like, well, how do you identify? And she's like, well, I'm Aryan, I'm Persian, I'm white. And she threw her scarf over her head and stormed off for a smoke. And I thought, and it left me in this place. Like, what do you mean you're white? You live in New York. You're very brown, actually. Like you're darker than me, And so, this started to lead in my master's. Well, what is this Aryan race discourse, and what is the relationship to Persians and then Persians in diaspora? So this is what that character is all about. And then Fatima, who also actually I started in my undergrad, came before Oreo. Fatima was also looking at the Western gaze, so the Orientalist gaze, the dehumanization of the ethnic other, right? But then through this idea of these Persians who were, self-romanticizing. I thought that was also part of that. So the character self-romanticizes for the jury of the jury in the game show, who, she gets the golden buzzer because she performs a caricature of her ethnic identity that is readable by this Western audience. So to me, it's like, here's your art world critics. You have your art speak philosopher, Bellatrix, who no one really understands, but we pretend to, And then you have your ruthless critic, and who is the Simon Cowell, and then you have your Paula Abdul, who is Mira, the sympathizer. And so, they tell her, you're like a lost artifact dug up from the sands of the Andromeda or something like this. Like, they would super exotify her, and she knows that if she performs that exoticization, that she wins. And to me, that's also a critique of the art world and how we're expected to perform our ethnicity to a Western audience in a very specific way. And it also references, those pioneers and the canon who I feel like only perform a very single narrative of like what it means to be Middle Eastern, or what it means to be an ethnic woman, and so then I have Coco, which is my third character, who like disrupts all of these purist, nationalist sentiments and traps, and performs this like hybrid, alien kind of post-human. Body, and Coco only performs and communicates through movement, and the movement is a style of dance which is called whacking, and it started in the 1970s in LA, and it's emerged actually before Vogue. So Vogue was here in the 80s here in New York, and then whacking started in the 1970s, like I said, on the West Coast. It was part of the disco scene. But by the same community, queer, trans, racialized folks. And so I used to, post-COVID, I did a lot of dance growing up as well, as mostly urban dance. And I really loved whacking because I would hybridize it, because it is a very hybrid dance. It comes from old Hollywood glamour poses, but it also uses a lot of like Muslim martial arts, salsa, different forms, but it's characterized by its very rapid hand gestures. But then I accentuate my wrists to create even hybridize the language of the dance even more, to bring in kind of Iranian Persian dancing that uses these wrist rolls and these long strides with the hand. So Coco only communicates through this kind of new language outside of colonial tongue. So there's a refusal to communicate with this character, and so through like exploration of, say, the materiality, like I said, of the body, it dispersing the character and soaring and being able to traverse and break the boundaries of the frame and enter both screens on like a 2-channel. To me, this is these like moments of subversion, but also like the futuristic elements of the character, this kind of post-human or alien quality.
And such an interesting choice to use parody to talk about these really complex ideas.
Right.
And is parody something that has always been in your work, or is that something that's come through as you move more and more towards video and AI?
Well, early on in my undergrad years, I was really, very Anna Mendieta, like lots of blood. It was very like early feminist.
We all go through that phase, women do.
Yeah. And, I was like very political. And I noticed I was losing my audience, and people felt like I was really angry, and it just wasn't communicating. But I didn't want to soften up, I still wanted to have a bit of aggression, and I felt like I could get there with humor and still cross those boundaries, but then bring people in, give them permission to laugh. But then again, it like shifts the power dynamic, because you're now the orator of the joke. You're not at the other end of it.
And it allows you to say things that you can't say.
Exactly.
Right? Like you said, about politically incorrect terms or labeling people particular things, that you can't say perhaps. But in humor, you get away with doing all kinds of things that are like against the rules.
Exactly.
Right? And with a character, I didn't say that. That character said it.
Exactly. It allows you a lot of freedom, I think. I think about even just clowning in day-to-day life, like where, the things that clowns do on a street. If somebody who wasn't a clown were to perform those things, get into cars, stop people, take things from them, they get away with so much. That would be like
assault, robbery.
Exactly,
they would be arrested.
Exactly. And so I think it allows you this freedom, which is a really interesting choice to talk about these very difficult situations and understandings of identity, particularly as you're talking about this, Persian identity, and thinking about Aryan, and thinking about being of color, and where do those overlap?
And that's something I never heard, by the way, that Iran as a nation of Aryans.
Right.
And I never heard that. So tell me a little bit about it.
Well, historically, I mean, I could refer you to a really good scholar, Reza Ebrahimi, who traces the word back to like the Zoroastrian texts. But I think from what I understand, it was really promoted and perpetuated by the Pahlavi monarchy. And it was in the children's school books, for example, like, you are part of the Aryan race, you are part of the superior race. And Reza Ebrahimi, he says that, what does he call it? Dislocation? That Iranians argue that because of their historical accomplishments, that they are more likely, that they feel like they have been geographically dislocated, that they actually belong in Europe. Because, the Pahlavis, they wanted to turn Iran into Paris. Like, they had this like European kind of sense of cultural imperialism that they were trying to impose on the Iranians. And, this is, I think, which was part of the reason why they brought in the current regime with Khomeini, because it was more, they wanted to go back to tradition. Mm-hmm. They feel like they were being too Europeanized or whatnot. Again, like, I'm not a historian, so, I'm not sure exactly at what point things happened, but Reza Ebrahimi does a really, really good job at tracing the etymology of the term Aryan.
And doesn't your character of Fatima, doesn't she sing or talk in Parvi as well?
Yes, yeah. So Fatima sings in Pahlavi, which is a language that a lot of Iranian nationalists want to return to, because they think that contemporary Farsi has been tainted with Arabic and French loanwords. So they want to go back to this purest language that none of us speak. And Pahlavi is actually like, that song is gibberish. There isn't a single word that is, comprehensible. And I had to it took me 8 months to find a Pahlavi linguist, Professor Toledo from University of Toronto, who's actually Spanish, like from Spain, who's a Pahlavi linguist. And he translated my poem for me.
Wow.
The song is, and so I was really interested in like romantic expressions of nationalism. And my recent film, DissemiNation, also explores like kind of romantic nationalism as well. So in that film, which is my newest one, it's a migration story. And again, I perform both characters, but they're not as campy, even though their aesthetic is always a little campy because you are who you are. But it's a very serious performance. And I worked with an acting coach to be a very serious actor. Yeah, so DissemiNation is a migration story. And again, I perform both of the characters, but it's the style of the performance is very different. But the script was composed of really ultra conservative, like fascist writings by leaders across history and time. Mm-hmm. And that's what the caseworker is reciting. And the migrant, Azadeh, which means freedom in Farsi, she is reciting nationalist poem and state anthems. So, we're looking at expressions of nationalism there. One that's like very romantic, kind of like the Pahlavi, and then these fascist sentiments. And what's interesting about the work is that it starts to become one unified kind of voice. It's not about regionalism. It's not about pointing at someone and saying they're wrong, but really looking at how language is used to construct a sense of national belonging or identity, So, I feel like I've been really interested in that these days, and how we're different expressions of nationalism. Why are people so protective of the nation? This like imagined sense of the,
Yes.
What is the nation and what is the myth of the nation?
And what are the factors that contribute to that as well? Like, I always think that's really fascinating, of what does it take for fascism to just kind of rise up and show, its ugly head, as we are seeing.
Yeah.
Well, and so you said your parents identify as Aryan.
Yeah, well, I don't know if they would continue to identify as Aryan, but there was a time when I had asked them, "Do you identify as Aryan?" And they both kind of laughed, and they were like, yes, when I was younger, but like no now. We were part of a political family, and they were really active until a certain age, but then they went the other way. And they really wanted to disassociate from Iranian. The regime, my dad converted to Catholicism. He was very Catholic. I think it was a PTSD response from like the war and migration
And when did they leave?
1988, the last day of the war, and I was 3. Mm-hmm. Wow. And yeah, so.
And you went to Canada?
We were refugees for 2 years, like in Turkey and I think Bulgaria. And then, we came to Canada, and then we kind of moved back and forth, and then they settled in Gatineau in Quebec. Yeah.
Wow. So what's your personal connection to Iran, to a Persian culture?
Well, I mean, there are aspects of the culture that I really love and carry with me, like the hospitality of Persian culture. I think I'm really into the art as well. There's a lot of incredible Iranian artists and filmmakers. Our history with film is so rich, and so the poetry is beautiful. But the culture of hospitality, I think, is something that I've carried with me, and it's very Persian, part of my upbringing. But there are things that, growing up in the diaspora, well, you're just culturally hybrid as well. So, and, there are things that I don't always understand and have to be mindful that, there are my interpretations of, Western feminism and or my interpretations of, freedom that might not apply in all situations. And like, we have to be open to different, descriptions and experiences of these things and what little acts of subversion could look like. Like, I'm very outwardly queer, and you know what I mean? Like, unlike my other Persian friends who even live in the diaspora but were raised there, who would never post pictures of their partner online, for example. Right. Whereas like I get to a point where I'm like, I don't need to police myself. This is my partner. You know what I mean? And I'm actually making a 3D print of 2 lesbians like engaging in sex with a bow dildo. So, the work is like very queer and unapologetically queer. But it took me a long time to feel comfortable. But once I did it, I knew there were no consequences for me. Now, who knows in the States here, but.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
But there are certain things where, you feel like there are parts of the culture that you don't always understand.
So back to your work for a second, I wanted to ask you about the elements of the media spectacle space, really like this, game show, talent show, variety shows, weird futuristic backdrops in there. And you're sort of like using elements of daily life or the kitchen table, but you're using this obvious media fabricated studio space. And how are they important in your work?
Well, I think they offer a platform. So, for example, with Supernova, here's a stage to examine various ethnic performances and put them in a conversation in a way that's cohesive. And I think the game show offers that. In Celestial Throne 2, I started to build more tension with the characters, a bit more passive aggressiveness, or microaggressions being expressed by Oreo towards Fatima. And like, I'm able to build those relationships and those dynamics and expose hierarchies and communication between the judges being like the art world reps and the different like modes of performance. So, and, I think there's just so much space in there it literally offers us a stage, to examine these performances. And sure, any stage could be like that. I could create a dialogue scene in a kitchen space where maybe we could get access to that. But I think it comes back to the saturation of the imagery, the seductiveness of it. I always loved Jeopardy. And I also always loved the game shows. And I noticed I was so seduced, especially at a young age, like, you know, they'd get the golden buzzer and their parents would cry and I'd cry with them, or like I would watch the shows and, you know, be so moved by this performance and you know, the whole build up, these shots with like, they're anxious and you see their hands, or like these tear jerking moments, or, you know, these moments of just chaos where they you know, Oreo like tosses the camera and says, "Get out of my face," and storms off stage. And, you know, all these characters available for you to recreate, but then bring a kind of critique in as well. So I think for me, it's just like something that I feel like is so seductive. I don't know what led to Supernova. I can't remember that moment where I was like, oh, I want to create a talent show. I think I was watching a lot of RuPaul Drag Race too. And, you know, I was always working in gay clubs when I was in university. And so I did a lot of drag shows and these variety shows. So I was always performing and, you know, around queens. And so it's a big part of my culture, like growing up in queer culture. So you know, and then there was that, right? The elements and drag performances, like the lip sync performance. And there's moments with Fatima where the lips don't match. And that's, you know, a nod to queer culture. Or the whacking of Coco, a nod to queer culture. The stage itself, you know, performing in all of these various kind of drag, like even ethnic drag is what I often call my, you know, work. And the judge, Sirius, his cutouts and his style is inspired by Lee Bowery, who is this Australian, British queer fashion designer. So there are so many elements of like queer culture in the work as well. So yeah, I think the stage, the colorfulness, the campiness is just like a part of my culture as a queer person.
I mean, it plays with this idea of the real, right? Like a game show where, as a spectator, when you were a kid watching it, these contestants were real people and they're answering real questions. You know, they're doing their best to solve these complicated things, but then you're fabricating it into this totally unreal space. And then on the other hand, with, you know, the talent show, you know, sometimes a contestant is projecting their sort of real best self, their thing that they can do. They're revealing something about their inner self and their talent. And then with, you know, a kind of the tradition of like a queer ball or, you know, RuPaul's Drag Race or something like that, they're actually doing a layered aspect of that, where this is someone where I want to be. This is someone who I want to be in that kind of real space, but it's a totally, you know, artificial space. But you can have your peers all around you watching you be real or unreal.
But I think that's also related to this idea of drag, of like you called it ethnic drag. Obviously, it's camp, but also, you know, Stéphane Saint Laurent says radical drag. Right. And I think it's also your figures of the alien, or I've seen a lot of art recently that's talking about the monstrous as something else or something other, as a form of liminality or a place to speak from. And it's outside, not fully integrated, a metaphor for difference. Maybe can you speak to that a little bit more, like your conception of kind of alienation in your work, or how that connects to drag as well?
Yeah. Well, let's start with alienation. So I think Coco is that character who is occupying the liminal space, and we get that with the void. And we get that with the movement as well. It doesn't really fit in a specific language. So I have to circle back though. Wait, let me go back, because how I conceptualized Coco, I wanted to understand what I was doing with Coco that I wasn't doing with the other two characters. So I created this manifesto called the Futurism Manifesto, a proposal for a liminal futurism. And it's 5 prompts, and these 5 prompts inform the character. So one of the prompts is a new language, which is the movement. Another prompt is liminal melancholy, identifying all of those things in life that kind of all those external forces that make us feel displaced or deterritorialized.
Is that from Sarah Ahmed and Unhappy Objects?
No.
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh.
It's just my own feelings.
Oh, okay.
But I'd love to hear about that.
Yes, we'll talk.
And then another one is expanding the geographical imagination. So creating something outside of, anything that would give us any like sense of topography or anything identifiable in space. And I thought, well, what could that look like? Well, that would be the void. That would maybe be a liminal space. As a site of exploration, monstrosity, transformation, but the liminal space can also be, and this is where in dissemination things get really complicated in the work, the character, awakens and finds herself in a void. And this is an area of being stateless. It's an asylum seeker, in the limbo space of the bureaucratic system, which, right now really resonates as well. So there's an area of liminality in my work that isn't so emancipatory. It shows us the precarity of living and the violence of living in liminality. Mm-hmm. But then with Coco, it's different, because it's about embracing, like, again, the alien, as a transformative figure, as by creating your own language that's outside of colonial language, by creating your own spaces, by being able, like I said, breaking the boundary of the frame. The character is able to split and soar and through light travel the installation. So there's kind of those 2 ways that I'm reflecting on this idea of liminality and monstrosity in my work, or to be alienated. Mm-hmm. Because it can be very liberating, but I think we can't over romanticize it, because there are real life stakes of
Absolutely.
being in the,
I think that's a nice way of putting it. Like you talked about this void, but also this statelessness of being caught in the system, or being caught in refugee camps where you are not a national to any state. I mean, that is stateless. Yes, I understand that. But I think it's really interesting to focus on that, because so we have romanticized liminality a lot in terms of diaspora, I think. And so I think speaking to the ways in which that is harmful or dangerous or precarious is really important. So I think that's beautiful that you're highlighting that too.
Mm-hmm. I think it's important. And I was really romanticizing it until I started dissemination, and then I realized, oh, wait, there's layers here. Yeah.
And I mean, we're seeing that today in America, more and more of people in these places, states in limbo. Mm-hmm, it's very upsetting.
It's really unsettling, yeah. It's unlike any other time I've been here, and I can feel the weight of the tension and the remorse, yeah.
Yeah, I think people are carrying it, a lot of it.
Yeah.
But you mentioned this other word, alien, and you weren't, you were talking about it, in terms of political state and paperwork. But I want to talk about space aliens. I'm a huge sci-fi fan, and I know that people reference science fiction when talking about your work. So tell me, who are your major sci-fi influences, and what do you see the connection and metaphors in your work to that?
Yeah. So I think the history of futurism starts with, or is canonized with, Sun Ra, the jazz musician from Chicago, and his futuristic leanings. And then, several years later, we get indigenous futurisms that start to emerge. And then we get Arab futurism, or Gulf futurism, or Sino and Desi futurism, and queer futurisms, and intersectional futurisms. And I think my Sino futurism is like serving in this discourse, except it's working outside of like ethnic modes of belonging, and again against that purist trap. Because my PhD right now, when I started the work, I was looking at how futurism could be nationalistic. And so I was tracing the genealogy down to Italian futurism, which was fascist. and realized, well, there is a very different expressions of nationalism. And, Black nationalism or indigenous sovereignty is very different than Italian fascism, right? And so but I still felt unsettled by that there was really no futurism for me. Well, and the futurism in Sun Ra and onwards, these heterogeneous futurisms, as they call them, they are, reacting to something. They're reacting to colonialism. They're reacting to the legacy of slavery. They're reacting to, Gulf futurism and Sino-futurism are a little bit different. They're more reflecting on the contemporary moment, but a lot of them are reflecting on issues of injustice and environmental exploitation and capitalism and hyper-consumerism and all of that. But they're still very much entangled and embedded in a discourse of ethnic fetishism a little bit. So I was like, how do I get out of this? So I was like, I'm just going to create my own manifesto. And so part of my PhD project is working on this manifesto, and I've been looking at a lot of Afro-pessimist kind of thinking about the world and unworlding, which is a term that Jack Halberstam has put forward, and I think it's really it's based on the idea that reparation is a ruse, and that instead of world building, because anything that we would world build would only reproduce the inequalities and injustices in the power systems of today, that the only way is to lean more and more into destruction and what he says like entropy and collapse. And it's funny because I was at a talk with him just a couple of weeks ago at Eflux, and I asked him, aren't we already there though? You know what I mean? Like when you look at Ukraine and when you look at Gaza, like how much more destruction are we talking about? Like has the end of the world not already come? In indigenous futurism, for example, they say the native apocalypse has happened, So I think for some people, the end of the world has come, and, so it is maybe about repair. Maybe that is what world building is about.
My understanding too is that this idea of entropy and collapse is that we have to reach a point where everything collapses. Is that not part of it as well? That like capitalism comes to an end as we know it.
Right.
Like late capitalism comes to this kind of destructive place. Is that?
Yeah. And Jack's saying that, like Haberstam's saying that we need to stay there. We need to mull in this space. And I'm like, okay, but then what? I mean, so I suggested, well, there are anarchist traditions that we can emulate, because he's looking at anarcho-architecture. I'm like, but there is actual anarchy, like Zapatistas, they have their own systems, they have their own money, they have their own community, they have their own education. Like there are things that we can emulate, and again, you don't want to, I don't know about the Zapatistas. Maybe I'm sure there are hierarchies still, and I'm sure it's not a utopic, total utopic model. But perhaps there's something in anarchy, that we can emulate or model whatever the aftermath of this collapse looks like. I don't know.
Yeah.
But yeah, in terms of futurism and speculative fiction and sci-fi, I think my work kind of tends to go in that realm of Octavia Butler, like more critique, more dystopic and less utopic, which I think some of the, futurist artists tend to lean towards. For example, Sun Ra's work was very utopic, but he would bring up a lot of, the ills of the world and what was happening in his work. But
I think that's also to do with time, that it was about creating a space of possibility.
Right.
That hadn't been kind of articulated in the same way as now. We understand things differently, and things have shifted drastically too.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly. But yeah, certain artists that I really like, Octavia Butler is one of them, as a writer, but I'm really into Scawanati's work as an indigenous Mohawk futurist. Love the work of like Mauritian Aliyari, Lawrence Leck. I think Lawrence Leck's inspiration, like his installations are very similar to mine. I think if you put our works together, it would be a nice conversation. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So you're heading back to Canada tomorrow?
I am, yeah.
And then what's next?
Heading to Cairo, which is exciting because I've never actually been to an Arab-speaking country. So,
Oh, no.
yeah.
Oh, wow.
Someone who's so intersectional, my travels don't reflect, my passport doesn't reflect that. My travels have been very Euro and Western centric, which is, fine, but I'd really like to experience, more culture. I went to Japan last year, which was really exciting. But yeah, so a Chirotronica. Yeah, Chirotronica. Presenting a work I actually created here in New York last year at a residency at Onyx Midtown. It was a VR piece with avatars, and it's this queer dance club scene. I'm also doing like an augmented reality workshop. And yeah, the next major project is at the National Museum in Norway. And for that, I'm creating thanks to the Canada Council for the Arts, very large 3D print of these two queer women from the Kama Sutra, actually, but I'm reimagining them. Right now working on the design, and doing some research about, their significance and who they are, or if they, how they were imagined anyway at the time. But it's for the show of the South Asian artist Noor Bangu, who is also Norwegian. So she's doing a show called Deviant Ornaments. I think maybe we should change the name. I don't know, but
that's
it's
a nice
about,
name, though.
Yeah, queer Islamicate art. From the kind of Swana region in Oslo at the National Museum there. So that's the next big project for this year. Yeah.
Thank you.
Well,
No problem.
Thanks. Lots coming up.
Yeah, lots
Exciting.
coming up.
Thank you so much. And thank you so much for coming today to talk to us. It's
Oh,
been
it's a
really lovely
pleasure.
to have you here in the studio and listen to you talk about your work so eloquently.
Oh,
So,
thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for the opportunity.
And it's a beautiful day out, so grab the last, bits of the energy of New York. Hope to
Yes.
see you again here soon.
Thank you.
And if you want to know more about Rah's work, you can visit her website at raheleh.com or follow her on Instagram.
Eleh, ELEHRAH.
Please take a moment to hit the like button, rate us, and review the show. It makes a big difference in helping us reach more listeners.
Your tax-deductible donations make this podcast possible. Please support us at internationalarrivals.org.